He's a geopolitical analyst who's accomplished an amazing amount of things in a short period of time. He specializes in U.S. national security and Eurasian affairs. He is the founder of the Weichert Report, a world news website, as well as contributing editor for American Greatness. He graduated from DePaul University with a BA in poli-sci and has an MA in statecraft and national security affairs with a specialization in defense policy from this institute. He is also an associate member of New College at Oxford University and previously served as a congressional staff member. Recently, Mr. Weichert was invited to become a lecturer for the Kosciuszko Chair of Polish Studies at the Institute of World Politics. In this role, Brennan has spoken on various topics, such as the rise of Erdogan's new empire in Turkey, the true ambitions of Russian foreign policy, does Europe need nukes? And he was asked by the Polish-American Congress to speak to the House Polish caucus on the German-French-Russian alliance and its threat to Poland. He's a contributing editor for American Greatness and has been a prolific writer for Real Clear Politics and other publications. Ladies and gentlemen, keep your eyes on this young man. He's doing some interesting work in the media and on behalf of the country, and today he's going to talk to you about space defense.
Thank you all for coming from beautiful sunny California. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that is not often talked about, and that is national security space policy. I'm very heartened today to announce that Vice President Pence convened the first quarterly meeting of the White House Space Council at the Smithsonian Institute, where they announced that they were going to begin, the Trump administration, reinvigorating our manned space program. However, thank you. Yes, this is a very near and dear subject. That was this morning at 10 a.m. That's correct. This comes on the heels, unfortunately, of China's announcement yesterday that their quantum internet works, and they're now investing $10 billion into doubling down on the technology. The quantum internet is an unhackable technology. It is aimed at removing the current internet and replacing it with a Chinese-dominated new form of communications that our NSA will not likely be able to hack, and that will empower the Chinese as never before. It is a revolutionary technology. I hate to sound like, Where are we with that idea? Where are we with that idea? That's exactly right. I'm going to be touching about that in a few seconds, but I hate to sound like Thomas Friedman, but that did used to be us, and so let's get into it. Today, America is losing the space war. The Vice President's announcement was excellent. We needed it, but we needed it a decade ago, so this is not far enough. I don't want to, bite the hands that feeds us, but I'm going to say here, space policy is so far behind right now, and we don't have an integrated strategy for dealing with space at the geopolitical level. So here at this institute, they teach geopolitics, and they've been doing that even when people in DC were saying we don't need to study it anymore in the 90s. And so you look at the history of China, you look at the threats that they're posing to us and what they're investing their considerable money, thanks to us, into, and it's quite frightful. Every war we've fought since Desert Storm has been a space war. Desert Storm was America's first space war. We used GPS, Schwarzkopf's famous left hook through the desert that took the armor into Iraq. That was all GPS, satellites. The entire system that we depend on as civilians, cell phones, banking transactions, every signal goes through space. Here's the problem though, at least in the military side, which military is linked together thanks to our satellite system, but the military satellite networks in particular are antiquated. And thanks to the DoD procurement process, how the Defense Department acquires weapons and systems, it is still based on the 1960s model. So we are using analog-style procurement processes for what is the sine qua non, the essential element of America's military today. The bin Laden raid would not have happened the way it did without the interlinks provided by satellites. Our Thunder Run into Baghdad, I'm not going to get into the Iraq War here, but I'll say we toppled with relatively few people the Iraq in 21 days with the fact that we were using integrated forces. And so while we enjoyed what Charles Krauthammer referred to as the unipolar moment in the 90s when America was the colossus that straddled the world, no one would dare challenge us. Robert Gilpin talks about the hegemonic stability theory being the best way to run an international policy. He's right. Basically, one power is so powerful, like us or like Athens of old, that no one would dare challenge us, and that in and of itself creates stability. Unfortunately, the forces of globalization, while there have been very good things from globalization, there have been also very bad things. And one of the unforeseen consequences was we ended up basically redistributing wealth away from the United States and therefore America's military, and we sent it over to places like China. And so now today, we talk a lot about the rise of the multipolar world, a world dominated by many great powers other than the United States. And China is a leading pole in that multipolar world, and they're ascending. And by the way, unfortunately, we are declining. Relative decline has set in. It is not inexorable. We can reverse it, but it requires bold action. Our problems today are political. You have in your packets, there's an article I wrote for American Greatness. I write several pieces on this subject. An article for American Greatness recently called "The Way Forward is Up," and it's a 1.5 pager. Basically, the argument is America needs a silver bullet. We have let other powers rise to such a point that we can't do incremental changes to the way we do business in order to stay competitive and to stay dominant. We basically now are at such a point, we've rested on our laurels for so long, that we need a massive infusion of money and capital and some real innovative thinking. And there are innovative thinkers out there. You guys live in California, you see it all the time. There are the gig economy, there are a lot of really smart people out there, and they need an infusion of cash in order to, and a national policy in order to, and it seems like the administration is hinting toward that we need to have real leadership to really start building these things up. Some issues with the space architecture that we rely on in the military realm in particular is the fact that because it's so costly to buy, build, and launch military satellites, and we're using the old Cold War model of bundling, basically throwing as many capabilities into one satellite as possible. This increases the cost, and then we can't use cheaper civilian rockets to launch those systems into orbit. So then we have to build special rockets, and by the way, they're using the RD-180 engine from Russia. Don't think that hasn't been a point of contention. We have to do things to start making it cheaper to launch and field satellites, so we can start doing things that can defend those satellites in orbit. We need space-based missile defense to fight North Korea and Iran's nuclear threats. We need, the Air Force calls them rods from God. They're tungsten rods that are put into orbit, and they essentially can be launched at any target instantly. No one would ever mess with us again if we had these systems in orbit. Defense satellites to basically act kind of like a Secret Service agent protecting the president. They jump in front of the satellite systems that we rely on to deflect anti-satellite missiles being launched from China. China has anti-satellite weapons. These are missiles that can be launched. They track our satellites and they destroy our satellites. And once those satellites are destroyed, because the cost involved of repairing and launching them, they won't get replaced. Another thing they have are lasers that can blind and dazzle temporarily our military satellites, our optical gear. A guy from Lockheed, former Air Force general, when I was a student here a few years back, he came and spoke, and he talked about how basically the only self-defense mechanism our satellites have when they're lased like that is they shut down and they turn toward the sun. Now, they're not destroyed, but they are out of commission for hours, and because our military systems are not yet quite compatible with civilian systems, we can't just offload responsibilities to a civilian satellite. So the problem is, once that satellite goes down, until a ground-based technician, because we don't have a manned spaceflight program anymore, unless a ground-based technician can hopefully get through to that decommissioned satellite, We're blind. And by the way, the Chinese have strategic plans. Blind the Americans, prevent that integrated military force from operating in a coordinated fashion, and then surprise our friends, the American friends on Taiwan. China has not ever let go of their dream of recapturing Taiwan, and so this is a problem. Another issue that we have, I talked about, Elon Musk is the only guy that I can think of in the private sector who has, with SpaceX, managed to break through the procurement process. You have the iron triangle of the legislators and special interests combining with the big defense contractors, and then the inertia of the DoD bureaucracy. $500 billion over for our defense budget, and it's not buying us what it used to. China, Russia spend a fraction on their defense budgets, and every time I wake up, I hear a different, when I worked on the Hill, I heard this all the time, a different military expert coming in and saying that, well, they're going to eat our lunch. What's it buying us? Something's going wrong. Elon Musk is the only one who's managed to break through the procurement process, and basically, he had to sue his way in to be able to have SpaceX launch military satellites. And when he did sue his way in, the Air Force accepted the contracts, but at the last minute broke the contracts and sent them over to Lockheed and Boeing. There was a whole internal issue because one of the Air Force officers apparently was basically taking money from Lockheed. Anyway, but it was a big to-do, and this is the problem when you have a closed system like that, getting ever more bloated, and no accountability. When I worked on the Hill, one of my projects was we had to go through the DOT budget for the National Defense Authorization Act of 2014. That was not a fun experience. My wife will tell you I probably lost most of my hair. Thomas DeVerney is a space expert, and he talks about the vicious circle of space acquisition for the military because of the costs involved and the regulations. Few program starts, expensive systems with no spares or backups, expensive launches, low launch rates. The solution: more, smaller, less complex satellites that can be basically ride-share onto civilian rockets. Mixed constellations of both military and civilian satellites with similar capabilities. Distribute the capabilities. Increase the constellation size so it's harder for China to knock it out. Encourage low-cost medium launch through those issues that I talked about, and then change the export control so we can start importing better ideas from abroad. India is a leader in satellite launches. They have proven that for one rocket, they can launch upwards of 100 satellites on one rocket. It's amazing what they're doing. So we need to start figuring out what they're doing and replicating it. The four main threats to America today in space, the greatest is China. Russia, I think, is overstated because their economy is tethered to the price of oil. They're never going to be able to sustain what they think they can do in space. This is why they floated recently the idea of doing a joint US-Russian moon base where they would be mining the moon for the critical natural resources. North Korea and Iran, the gallery of rogues, their threat is in their nuclear weapons capability. Not only can they launch nukes at us, but furthermore, they can potentially, and James Woolsey, former CIA director who previously was the chancellor of this institute when I was here, James Woolsey has written a series of articles how he's worried that last year's North Korean satellite launches were actually putting electromagnetic pulse devices into orbit, and that they could basically hold us ransom. And imagine EMPs can knock out all modern technology with the flick of a switch. Doesn't kill us, but it kills our technology, which might as well kill us. And when I was on the Hill, there was a report that came out that if an EMP detonated, upwards of 90% of America's population within 2 years, if we could not fix the grid, which we couldn't, upwards of 90% would be dead. Dead. This is the stuff that keeps me up at night. It's just a funny graphic I uploaded Kim Jong-un on a satellite, kind of floating around. Everyone always gets a good laugh. This is...
That's the Rocket Man.
Yeah, Rocket Man, that's right. We talked about hegemonic stability theory. Robert Kagan, who's a scholar at American Enterprise Institute, he wrote a fantastic book. He's kind of made a career out of knocking both the Europeans and the post-Cold War visions of an end of history. He wrote a book in 2011 called The End of History and The Return of History and the End of Dreams. And basically he said, people and their leaders after the Cold War longed for a world transformed, but that was a mirage. The world has not been transformed. In most places, the nation state remains as strong as ever, and so too the nationalist ambitions, the passions, and the competition among nations that have shaped history. After the last few years, nationalist populism on the rise, the nation state has returned in full force. America must maintain its dominance if we are to survive. Dean Acheson, former Secretary of State under, I think, Truman, he said that Americans can only exist in a sphere of liberty. If there is no liberty, then Americans cannot exist. It's true. It's true. Credit Suisse, they have accepted the multipolar world. They now analyze the poll strength of the various countries that they think are the strongest on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the strongest. America is a 5 for now. If you look around what's going on, we've had 2.6% GDP growth. That's thanks to low-wage jobs and the last 8 years of loose monetary policy. It's not real. Whereas China's had 6.7% GDP growth, and they're going to keep having those high numbers. A modern economy cannot be number 1, or rather in this case number 5, based on that low GDP growth. We need a tax cut. I don't know if it's going to happen by the year's end. If we don't get it, we're going to keep having these low GDP growth rates. China's eating our lunch on this. The real unemployment number is 8.6%. The U6 number, Bureau of Labor and Statistics started accounting for these things back in the 90s, and the lowest it ever got was in the year 2000 at 6.8%. We can and need to get back to that level of real unemployment. America is now, since 2014, the second largest economy in purchasing power parity terms. China's number 1. And next year, it's believed, Goldman Sachs keeps saying next year is going to be the year that China displaces the U.S. as the world's largest economy in GDP terms. The American political system's in gridlock. This is all getting into one thing. China has a plan, and we don't. And it spaces the something I talk about most, but it's in a litany of other issues as well. But space is the thing that is both our future, it can determine if we stay on as the dominant force, and it's also our future. KPMG, the consulting firm, every year does a survey of 841 tech industry executives from around the world. They found that China is now closing the gap with the United States and leading the development of disruptive technology breakthroughs. They also said that Shanghai is the city that will rival San Francisco, along with California's Silicon Valley, as the world's leading innovation hub over the next 4 years. So by 2021, 2020, Silicon Valley will not be the leading innovation hub. The innovation economy in China is being energized by the technology disruptions that are occurring. What we've seen emerge over time is the result of countries and cities striving to replicate and build on Silicon Valley's technology innovation blueprint and their increasing degree of success. China's on the rise, we're on the decline. And they have, by the way, the China Dream, created by Colonel Lu Mingfu. He's one of the kind of lead apparatchiks of the President Xi Jinping's inner circle. He's retired from the People's Liberation Army now, but he wrote a very explicit book in which he outlined that he agreed with Michael Pillsbury, who said that China and the US are in the 100-year marathon, and that beginning in 1949, ending in 2049, China plans to displace the United States as the world's leading power. Xi has concurred with this as well. He says that by 2049, the China dream of strong nation, a rich country, strong nation will be fulfilled. Very ominous rhetoric. For his part, Colonel Lu, who's a senior advisor to the president of China, he said that it would be good for humanity for the United States to defeat, or for China to defeat the United States. Let that sink in. This is their inner cadre. As I talked about, it's not just about defending our existing space infrastructure. We need to develop space. We need to build up our defenses in space so that no one ever threatens us again. And we need to start looking at the acquisition of space materials for creating a new economy. It is said by people like Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the eminent physicist, that the world's first trillionaire will come from the space mining sector. In the House in 2014, we passed a resolution that basically allowed for private companies in the United States to go out into space, capture asteroids, and to develop the resources for sale. This is the future. I've got some other slides. Basically, missile defense, we need that. We can do space like Reagan wanted to. Killer satellites. China has the ability to launch cube satellites at our satellites with grappling claws. It's like out of James Bond, it's like Moonraker. And they will latch on and rip the insides out. And this is low-cost stuff. This is for the cost of a cell phone, a smartphone. They can do this. I talked about the lasers. The spaceflight program, China's manned spaceflight program. They are doing in 10 to 15 years what took us 30 years. Where are they going to be in another 10 years, given their economic growth and level of investment? Also, in terms of, real quickly, the resources. So we all talk about the next revolution in energy. I'm a big believer in nuclear fusion, but it's just not worked so far. The reason is because the deuterium-tritium reaction is not as effective as what many scientists believe would be more effective as a reaction, would be the isotope known as helium-3. This is a rare earth mineral, so it's not marketable right now because it's so expensive to get the little bit we have. However, it is in abundance on the moon and throughout the celestial bodies in the solar system. China is planning their next lunar mission, the Chang'e 4, launched by 2020 to study the geology of the dark side of the moon, where it's believed the abundance of helium-3 and other resources are. If they detect that this is in abundance, the Chinese plan, they look at the moon as the Persian Gulf of the next century, and they look at how we dominated the Persian Gulf, and of course China needs resources to keep its meteoric rise going, so they're going to plan to basically strip mine the moon. And they're going to get, whoever gets there first has first mover advantage, the almighty first mover advantage. And we are losing right now. Donald Rumsfeld in 2001 said that we are on notice, but we, the American people, have not noticed. This is to our detriment. I spoke with John Lanchowski before about the quantum internet. Yesterday, as I noted earlier, China has officially made the breakthrough in quantum internet. Now, last year, for 2 years before this was even launched, I was talking about this, and I was laughed out of the room by every expert. Same people who, anyway. China believed in it. They spent 10 years investing in it. They launched it last year, and it's working. Every expert in America said it couldn't happen, and it works. This is from the news article today. Chinese researchers have completed a practical demonstration of quantum key distribution, showing that it's possible to encrypt and send data between two locations in a secure way. The announcement proves that fiber satellite quantum communications network that China has spent more than 10 years building can generate and distribute cryptographic keys for real-world purposes. These keys should render communications impenetrable to hackers. So it works basically, it's based on quantum entanglement, which is it's a string theory. Einstein first observed it. He called it spooky action at a distance. Basically, a particle is able to exist in two different places in the universe simultaneously, and by manipulating these particles at the subatomic level, data can be relayed at instantaneous speeds, and regardless of distance. Dr. Michio Kaku over in Brooklyn, he's a fantastic physicist, he says that if there is intelligent life out there, it is likely they'd be using some form of quantum internet. That's how advanced this is. And lastly, because I want to also get ahead of the curve here, the EmDrive, the impossible drive. This is another thing the experts in the West say is not going to work. A gentleman in 1999 in England developed it. It's a propellantless engine for space. If it works, it can get you to Mars in 70 days. So think about the economic implications. If there's all these natural resources and the problem is cost of fuel, of propellant, this is a propellantless drive that basically acts like the warp drive of Star Trek. Now, that's not exactly, I'm sure my scientist friends will yell at me, but basically that's what it is. It's Star Trek stuff. China, NASA, EagleWorks has invested in it, but they're fighting an uphill budget battle. Nobody believes in the West anymore. We're all skeptics. China believes. They started investing in 2008. They're now testing it in orbit, in the Tiangong 2 Chinese exclusive space station. The UK Ministry of Defense and the US DoD are interested in using the EmDrive now, this is years after the fact though, to power space satellites, because a propellantless rocket engine would enable the military to get close to a target without anyone knowing it was there. China's ahead of us on this because they believe in it. Basically, the scientists say it doesn't work, even as the Chinese are proving it does, that it doesn't work because it violates Newton's third law of physics. Well, theories be damned, I guess. Reality gets involved. Lastly, I don't know about, I'm not a climatologist, global warming, whatever, but we do know that there is a freshwater, reduction in available freshwater supplies. Dr. Michael Bary, the man who is portrayed by Christian Bale in the 2015 film The Big Short, Dr. Michael Bary was the only man initially who predicted the housing bubble. He retired after making billions of dollars because he shorted the market. The guy's brilliant. Basically, he runs a bed and breakfast with his wife, but he does still invest in one thing. He's trying to figure out how to short water. because he thinks that's the next big bubble. And what we see is Brahma Shalani is the only guy I know who's writing about the water wars, water, peace, and war, confronting the global water crisis. Basically, water is the new oil, if this theory is correct. Well, guess what? There is one way to overcome water shortages. These celestial bodies in the solar system have ice. If we can figure out how to use the EmDrive to cut down distances, there's a whole new market up there. We can overcome a lot of the problems we're going to be looking at over the next 30 to 50 years. China, again, this is something they're looking at. We're kind of just talking about it. We're not really bringing the pieces together for a coordinated strategy the way that the PRC is. And I think my contact information, I realize I kind of sped through this because I know we're on a tight schedule and I apologize. My contact, I'm at Brennan Weichert, that's W-E-I-C as in Charlie, H as in Hilo, E-R-T. That's my Twitter handle. I'm also on Facebook at The Weichert Report, that's the, and then W-E-I-C-H-E-R-T Report. You can also get a hold of me at the Weichert Report at gmail.com. Also, my website, which I do geopolitical analysis, it's weichertreport.com, W-E-I-C-H-E-R-T report.com. And also, my articles are at, for American Greatness, M as in mother, greatness.com. This is my passion. I have a book, pending publication. Just waiting for final edits. We're going back and forth. We're having some problems, though, because they want me to make it a little too less academic. But anyway, though. This is what I do, and if we do have time for Q&A or...
How are we doing, folks? Would you like to ask one or two questions?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Well, you talked about water shortage. What about desalination?
Sure.
You have a big ocean there.
I agree. But in the context of space, I was saying space could also be a solution if we get up there. It gives us even more impetus, I would say, to stay up there. You know, we went to the moon in '69, and we had all the elite we could have, and we let it go. So, but you're right, desalination is another excellent thing. Okay. All right, thank you so much. And I'll be at the dinner tonight, too.